Bighorn, two epic battles the government lost. He's a California guy, grew up in Malibu and Los Angeles, and later moved to Montana, and in 1993 purchased and rebuilt the historical town of Garryowen, Montana. I always wondered if the announcer on Lafayette, this is your announcer, Garryowen, I wonder if that was some sort of a, I wonder if he made it up. I mean, maybe he did. We'll get into that later. Garryowen. He founded and built the privately run nonprofit Custer Battlefield Museum located in Garryowen. Mr. Kortlander was the recipient of the Governor's Award and named Tourism Person of the Year for over a decade of efforts to enhance the tourism potential in the state of Montana. Garryowen is located at the southernmost edge of the land where Sitting Bull's camp was located the day of the Battle of Little Bighorn. Garryowens were the first gunshots of the battle were fired. Mr. Kortlander has also published Custer in photographs and produced a play, Libby, which offered a new take on the battle and its aftermath. It seems in 1926, on the 50th commemoration of the battle, there was a radio reenactment, Custer's Last Stand, which in real life Libby Custer heard while she was staying in a New York City hotel. Libby is portrayed listening to this reenactment and reflecting upon her life with General Custer and the alleged conspiracy that she believed caused his death on the plains of Montana. She believed that Custer had many enemies at the Little Bighorn and none of them were Indian. Rather, she believed that his rivals sent him there on a suicide mission with too few troops and too little ammunition. Mr. Kortlander, founding director of the Custer Battlefield Museum, has been a Western Americana collector and dealer for most of his adult life. His personal book collection was assembled over 20 years and features some of the rarest and most desirable works in the province of Indian Wars and westward expansion collectibles. His appreciation for the unique history and grandeur of the West goes beyond operating a museum dedicated to its preservation and building his own amazing personal collection of books, manuscripts, and ephemera. He also owns the historic Montana town of Garryowen, located on the site of Sitting Bull's camp at the Battle of Little Bighorn. And Garryowen is also the resting place of the unknown soldier from the famous fight, and the site of the Peace Memorial, honoring all combatants of that historic battle. Wow. Now that is an interesting life pursuit. Well, welcome, Chris. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I just have to ask, what was the fascination with Sitting Bull, General Custer, and the whole little Bighorn incident? It was actually quite a big deal. Of course, it's been a long time now, but these conspiracy theories, as they're currently known, they're actually rather rich, and some of the effects are pretty far-reaching. I'm getting the sense of that anyway.
They are. My background is that I'm a dealer in historical manuscripts, rare photography, and art, and focuses on Western Americana and the Western migration of the United States. In 1993, I was living in Malibu and came to Montana and visited a friend who said that the town of Garryowen is for sale. And I said, "What's Garryowen?" And he said, "Let's drive down and see it." So I came down here to this remote location, which is right off Interstate 90. And there was 4 tons worth of trash here on the property and a rundown gas station, an unmarked tomb of a United States unknown soldier. And I kind of fell in love with it when I saw the tomb of the unknown. And within 2 hours, I was 32 years old. I wrote a check and I talked to the owner, who was a non-Indian that was married to a Crow Indian who died on the property of alcoholism. And he was a Vietnam vet. And I wrote him a check for an offer to purchase the property and tied it up in a 1-year option, not knowing really what I was going to do, but knew I had a vision for it for the future. I came back to Malibu, and 9 days later, I lost my house in the Malibu wildfire of 1993 with 351 homes that burned up in one day.
Oh, man.
I lost my whole entire collection, and the only thing I had was this piece of paper on an option to purchase this small Montana historic town. So the project I was going to pitch to somebody else, I ended up moving here by myself and doing the vision I had envisioned just a few months earlier. So that's how Garryowen got rebuilt. A little background on Garryowen. At the beginning of the introduction, you mentioned Garryowen from Rowan and Martin Laughlin. Actually, I shared an office with the former president of CBS Television when I lived in California after he was retired. And he arranged a lunch meeting with me and Garryowen from Rowan and Martin. At the time, he was Rosie O'Donnell's MC announcer for her show. And I wanted to meet him and get his background and get the take on how he got his radio name. Just a very interesting story. He's a radio station announcer from South Dakota. In 1955, his radio station manager was a Custer aficionado.
Really?
His radio name, Garryowens, with an S on it, named after this town. Now, just to give you a little background on this town, Buffalo Bill Cody named this town Garryowen in 1893 for Burlington-Quincy Railroad when they put the railroad in. And Burlington-Quincy Railroad knew that Buffalo Bill knew historic events that happened around this location because he once scouted for the 7th Cavalry and the 5th Cavalry, not in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, but previously. So he came up here and mapped out where the train stops should be, and he named Garryowen because Garryowen is the 7th Cavalry fighting song and is still the official song of the 7th Cavalry today in Fort Hood, Texas. So that's why Garryowen is named Garryowen. And the reason we know that is because when I bought the Elizabeth Custer manuscript collection, in Elizabeth Custer's hand, she has penciled a note that Garryowen was named after, from the story I just told you.
You know, that doesn't surprise me at all. I just had I don't know why, but I just thought, wait a minute. Because the other day on the program I was talking about, when these people started these rock and roll bands like Steppenwolf, yep, they actually knew the literary character Steppenwolf. They knew who he is. They know who Uriah Heep is. They know who Jethro Tull is, and I just thought, I wonder, Gary's real name is, Gary Bernard Altman. And I thought, now what if it turns out that your announcer, Garryowens, is actually from that part of the world and actually took his name from that town, and you just validated it? He did.
Yes.
Now that's just weird, man.
So my background was when Gene Autry was building the museum at Griffith Park in California in the early 90s, I was fortunate enough to have the museum and himself as a client, and he was purchasing items from me as a dealer for the museum. And that's what gave me my kickstart in the historical rarities trade. And one thing interesting, we're going to get into the raids, but I wanted to say during that period of time, there was a law that was created by the federal government called NAGPRA. That's an acronym for Native American Graves Repatriation Act. And I remember when I was involved with the Autry Museum and their staff, that they were very concerned because they were accepting federal funding, and they had to comply with about 2 inches worth of rules from the federal government regarding this new law that was being created and passed by Congress and going into effect, I believe, in 1991. And little did I know that I was going to move to Montana and build a town. I was living in Malibu before the fire. But I knew from that experience of going to that museum quite a few times, numerous times, that they were hiring a whole new staff just to comply with the federal law of NAGPRA, which is sensitive to Native American items. If you accept federal funding, there's about 2 inches of law that would apply to that institution, civilly and criminally. So I had a little bit of insight there. So once the fire happened and I purchased the town and I decided to come up here and do this project and start the federal 501c3 nonprofit identity for the Custer Battlefield Museum, I opted out of any federal funding, meaning there was a whole group of laws that did not apply to my institution because I was a private 501 without any federal funding. And interesting enough, I just want to back up a little and explain that when I came up here in 1993, just before that, when I was living in Malibu, President Bush Sr. changed the name from the Custer Battlefield to the Little Bighorn National Monument. And when I was sitting in Malibu watching CNN one night, I thought, here the government's vacating a name. So I called my Montana attorney and had him incorporate the name Custer Battlefield Museum, thinking that somebody may want to use that name in the future. I didn't know it was going to be myself. Ironically, it was. And that's how we have the name Custer Battlefield Museum. We're the only museum, private museum located on the battlefield, and the Little Bighorn National Monument and Last Stand Hill is just 3 miles down the road, where Lieutenant Colonel Custer and his command were completely annihilated. So there's 5,600 books on this topic, and the reason why there's so many books is because no person that spoke English survived the Last Stand Hill. Custer divided his column into 3 columns, and it was his column that got totally wiped out. And we see over 2,000 active duty Army officers, I should say military officers, and enlisted men and women that come here to our institution and the battlefield to study the mistakes that Custer did in this particular battle, so they're not recreated on our current battlefields today in Afghanistan, Iraq, etc.
You know, Native American lore is obscure to most people. And you know, oh yeah, they I don't know. I got to tell you, Chris, you know, people go around with this feigned respect for the Native Americans, and I don't, you know, maybe they just do it because they think it's the nice thing to do. But let me ask you this. Is your primary focus on just the Sioux Nation, or does it expand into other tribes as well?
Very good question. Our focus is on the western expansion of the United States, which included all the Plains Indians. The winners and the losers in the Custer battle is what we focus on. We happen to be located inside the exterior boundaries of the Crow Indian Reservation on a privately held enclave. This is fee patent property, not Indian trust property. We won't get into that spider web of laws right now, but we're located on fee property, and I'm a non-Indian. We focus on all Plains Indian tribes that fought in the Battle of Little Bighorn. All the different bands of Sioux, the Northern Cheyenne, the Crow Indians were scouting for us. They're only one of 4 Plains Indian tribes that never declared war on the United States. They were our allies in this battle. And they have a very strong treaty with our United States Congress today.
And which ones?
The Crow Indians.
The Crows, yes. Okay.
They were General Custer's, or Lieutenant Custer's scouts during this battle, and all of them lived. And that's why we don't have English account of the battle, but we have sign language account of the battle. There was a steamship on the Little Bighorn River named the Far West, and it was Curly, Custer's scout, that went to the Far West, and that was the first notification of what happened here at the battle to non-Indians, and that was all done through sign language.
Chris, do you mind if I just fire off a bunch of questions to kind of orient? I cut you off. I'm sorry. Finish your thought, and then I'll get to this.
No, I'm just saying that was the first notification to Anglos of what happened here at the battle. It was through sign language through Curly, George Custer's scout.
Wow. Well, let me ask you this then. I'm going to ask you a bunch of stuff because I really want to get into this, and I haven't had an opportunity to speak with anybody that's as knowledgeable about this, maybe ever. So, what was in it for the Crows to help the Anglos at all? I mean, what's their end of that deal?
Very good question. The answer is they didn't have GPS. They didn't have fence lines. They didn't have maps. When they signed the treaty with the United States Congress that all the Indian tribes had to be rounded up in January of 1876 in the middle of the dead of the winter, maybe 20, 30 below zero, the Plains Indians, really didn't have a concept of what they were signing or what they really needed to do. So they agreed that they were all going to move to a reservation by January of 1876, and that didn't happen. President Grant then ordered the military to basically go round them up and put them on a reservation. This was the Crow Indian Reservation in 1868. So the encroachment from the Sioux, from the Northern Cheyennes that came here to this territory, they were here encroaching inside the Crow reservation, so to speak. And the Crows decided, let's team up with Uncle Sam. They never lose a battle. Let's get rid of the other Plains Indians that are encroaching on our reservation. And just 2 years before that, Custer was sent out here to do a recon on the discovery of gold in the Black Hills in 1874. So 2 years earlier, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Far and Away with Tom Cruise, but that's when they came out and started claiming their land claims when the federal government wanted the western expansion of the United States to come this direction. So they started to give away plots of lands. And remember, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, they weren't states, they were territories at that time. So we had the rush of the gold seekers that came out 2 years earlier, and that was causing conflicts with the Native Americans that lived here. Keep in mind, these American Indians thought we were terrorists. They've never seen white people before. And we thought they were terrorists because they were raiding our wagon trains, taking our women, killing our citizens that were coming out here. So in a sense, back then it was a form of terrorism on both sides. We were terrorizing them, and they were terrorizing us. So the president sent the military out here to make peace, round up the Indians, and put them on a reservation in Oklahoma. That's what Custer was doing here, June 25th, 1876, and that was the progress that took place that started the Battle of the Little Bighorn exactly at the town of Garryowen, Montana.
All right. Well, now let me ask you this: the Cherokee got pushed into Oklahoma as well. So were they all being shoved into the same landmass there, or were they separate? Were there's going to be separate reservations? That seems a little dicey.
The Cherokee weren't a part of this movement here at this location, but Oklahoma seemed to be the state that the federal government wanted the Indians to be rounded up to, so to speak.
How many tribes are we talking here as far as the West? I presume the dividing line is going to be the Mississippi River, yeah?
Yeah, keep in mind, right now there's, I think, 564 recognized tribes in the United States.
Oh, is that all?
I separate them in two groups: the Plains Indians, or the Treaty Tribes, and I call them the Casino Tribes. So you have pre-1934 tribes that have a treaty with our United States government, with Congress. Some people say there's no more powerful piece of paper than a treaty with our United States Congress. So the Plains Indian tribes were pre-Constitution also, and they were here from the beginning. So we have numerous tribes, probably too many for me to recall and name on this show.
Chris, I'm just going to be, if you don't mind, I mean, this is just a delicious opportunity to really learn some stuff here. But I've got a bunch of questions. I mean, to me, the Kiowas, you mentioned the other tribe a minute ago. The fashion sense between the tribes difference. Like, I've always thought of the Apaches as kind of like the bikers because they're wearing the headbands. And then you've got the Kiowas that have got those great, those horizontal bone chest plates and all this. I guess the question I really want to start with is what happened? Who are these people? They didn't just spontaneously burst into existence on the North American continent. Some of them look Asian. Some of them look more aquiline. Who are these cats, and what happened to them? They got no written language to speak of. They're communicating in sign language. They know all kinds of stuff about. I mean, they managed to survive for a long time. Some of them lived to be pretty old, so they had something going for them. But I'm just wondering. It's almost as though, the white Europeans showed up over here and went, say, these people look like they're from outer space, because we can't relate to them at all. And I wonder how they communicate with each other. I mean, I want to hear as much as you have to offer, how their language is developed. If you want to talk about cave drawings, it's okay with me, but what sparked the advent of this Aboriginal I'm not. You can't even say race because they don't even. There are a number of. I mean, you could say, okay, the Native Americans, they're a race. Well, not really, because they don't. The tribes don't. They don't look alike. You know, the Comanches look vastly different from the some of the other tribes. And you got the Iroquois out there in the east. So we'll stick with the west, but I'm just going. This is really nuts, and it looks like before the Europeans got here, there was like 500 little Vietnams going on. So, you know, all over the country. So, do you have an anthropologically speaking? Where did these people come from? Where do we think they actually originated?
Well, you know, I'm really not an expert on that, but I will share with what I know. You know, Lewis and Clark came out and discovered the West and mapped the West for the federal government around the turn of the century, around in the early 1800s. And the Mandan Indians in the North Dakota were the Central Plains tribes. And then we have branched off the Northern Cheyennes, the Crows, and the Sioux, all from the Mandan tribes in the North Dakota. I mean, what happened thousands and thousands of years ago? There's experts, anthropological experts that can answer those questions. There was the Kennewick man that was found in Kennewick, Washington.
Yeah.
There's a Wikipedia page on that. But what happened here is quite remarkable. Keep in mind, we're talking about indigenous people.
Yeah.
We're talking about hunters and gatherers. We're not talking about business people. We're not talking about European values. We're talking about a whole, even today, along a lot of the Plains tribes. It's something that I have total respect for. They still live on their original ground. These are people that know their reservation, that know their area. They're hunters and gatherers, and they're indigenous. They have clan systems, and it's tribalism. It's a totally different world. And an anthropologist told me once, unless you live among them, you're only an observer.
Yeah.
I've been here on this property almost 25 years now, and it's been an experience and an eye-opener. I wanted to bring up one point, and I know you want to get into this segue here too, but our federal government law enforcement's out of control. And I know I've sent you background on the current developments here, but do you mind if I tell you a short story about what happened to me on this property?
Chris, you are absolutely at liberty to discuss whatever you want, at whatever depth, at whatever frequency.
In 2005 and in 2008, I was raided by the Bureau of Land Management with SWAT teams. When I say SWAT teams, I'm saying 24-member teams that had M16s and riot shotguns, battering rams. They came here and surrounded my town, took down my museum intern, who was a degreed intern. We've had an internship program here for expiring historians that major in history, bachelor's and master's degrees. We've had 4 interns that have now become PhDs that have come through my internship, which is a 125-day internship. And if more people would like to know about that, they can go to our website, custermuseum.org. If they know any young people that would be interested in an internship here, it's quite an experience, believe me. Custer comes and gets killed here every year during the reenactment. I wonder why he keeps coming back.
Right.
In 2005, I was raided by a SWAT team of the Bureau of Land Management that came in here and gave me a search warrant for a button and a suspender buckle.
A button and a suspender button, and they brought machine guns with them because they want those items.
They came in here guns a-blazing. When I'm saying that, I'm saying they came in here pointing M16s at people, including one of my interns that they took down spread eagle on the ground, literally with an M16 pointed to the back of his head.
Why?
We're talking about a college intern that had a degree with no criminal background. And by the way, I was a law enforcement officer in the state of Montana for almost 5 years. I ran for county sheriff in this county. I have no criminal background. So after looking at the search warrant and being petrified, I told them their search warrant wasn't valid, and I explained to them why, that it was for the wrong buildings and the wrong place and the wrong language. I should have kept my mouth shut, but I explained to them that the search warrant wasn't valid. And so they huddled for about 20 minutes while they had an armed guard with me, and came back and told me if I didn't sign a general consent to search for only the button and the buttons and the suspender buckle, that they were going to drive back to Billings, Montana, talk to the federal judge, get a new search warrant, and he would be angry because it would be wasting federal resources, and that I would get more prison time, and it would be in my best interest if I signed the general consent for the buttons and the suspender buckle.
Well, what's the matter with these people?
Well, we're going to get into that.
Okay, sorry.
No. So, I signed the general consent thinking I wanted to cooperate. I had nothing to hide. And I would recommend to any listener listening to this podcast now that they never give up their right that's bestowed upon them by our federal government for a search without a warrant under any case, any situation whatsoever. Even if it's a vehicle stop and you have nothing in the car and they want to search it, retain your right for no searches without a warrant signed by a federal judge or a state judge. That is your right. Never give up that right. Because and I was a law enforcement officer, and I heard these stories, and I didn't believe them until it happened to me. So I'm here to tell you firsthand, always retain your right for no searches without a warrant signed by a judge, even if you're innocent. Because I cooperated with the federal government. Once they found out that they didn't have a case against me, they seized over 1,000 items from me. And that's inclusive of paperwork and invoices, and computers, and artifacts, Indian and non-Indian. And for the next 4 years and 8 months, they threatened me with 89 years in prison. They re-rated me in 2008 and came in and took all the eagle feather war bonnets out of the museum. The same office of the Bureau of Land Management out of Billings, Montana. They threatened me with 9 felonies, 89 years in federal prison. They wanted me to forfeit my property, and I have a handicapped son, and they told me I was never going to see my son again because I was going to go to prison for the rest of my life. I mean, it basically made me suicidal myself.
I got to tell you, Chris, my blood pressure's going up just listening to this, because we know that they get wild. They love to wave those guns around, and we also know that they get real docile when the public pushes back. You notice that?
Oh yes. Well, I want to explain too that a lot of these federal agents are veterans, and I have a high respect for our American veterans, the males and the females. They come here to our museum. We teach them what happened historically here, so the same mistakes are not repeated. I've received awards from military commanders. I've had 3-star generals in my museum. Some of these federal agents come back from Afghanistan and Iraq that are veterans, and they have military hiring preference as federal agents. They go to the Federal Law Enforcement Academy in Georgia. They spend 4 months in training and come out with this little gold badge that says U.S. at the top of it, and they get empowered, and they have an ego.
Mm-hmm.
One of those individuals that are federal agents. When I say federal agents, specifically our Department of the Interior federal agents. I'm not speaking about the FBI, U.S. Marshals, DEA. I'm talking about the Interior Federal Police, the Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management. They should be working for LA County Sheriff or Los Angeles Police Department that have felony calls every hour to get their adrenaline rush.
Well,
They get 1 or 2 cases a year, like in my instance, and they come in guns a-blazing. You don't need to come in guns a-blazing for a button and a suspender buckle. This is my story. Now I wanted to mention, I don't know if you know anything about the Gibson guitar raid
oh yes.
that happened in 2008, where Federal Fish and Wildlife took a SWAT team and raided Gibson guitar in Nashville, Tennessee, twice over exotic wood under the Lacey Act. The Lacey Act is an exotic wood law to protect rainforests in other countries for the exportation and importation of exotic wood into the United States. Congress gave that enforcement to Federal Fish and Wildlife, one of the same agencies that raided me here, that went overboard and overzealous with me. They raided Gibson Guitar Factory with a SWAT team over exotic wood. Think about that. I want the listeners to know that Boehner, the Speaker of the House, gave up his seat during one of Obama's speeches so that the president of Gibson Guitar could sit in his seat when all of this was going on, to bring national publicity to the over-top zealous raid by Federal Fish and Wildlife at the Gibson Guitar Factory. Now I'm just going to get into the just narrow scope of why that happened. I believe they were importing wood from Bangladesh, and some of these facts could be off. I'm not an expert on their raid. But in the provision of the exportation of the property, they had all the right export paperwork signed by the exporting country, by their officials. When it got to the United States, our officials, Federal Fish and Wildlife, for the Lacey Act, decided that there was a provision in the federal law that the wood needed to be worked, meaning they needed to hire some laborers in Bangladesh to sand the wood. Well, they did. But our government said the wood wasn't sanded enough, and I'm not exaggerating. And then they issued a search warrant based on the probable cause that the exotic wood was not sanded enough for the guitars.
What?
And that's why they raided Gibson Guitar and seized a couple of pallets worth of wood worth a couple $1 million. Now, the president of Gibson Guitar made a decision. I read this, a board decision that let's pay a fine, let's plead to a crime, and let's get this behind us so we can get on, and our job is to make guitars and make a profit. We're a corporation. I get that. I understand that. It wasn't a priority. Their priority was to get it behind them, business people.
Sure.
My priority now is to be outspoken and talk about these federal raids. Let's move this to the Four Corners raid, the Celebras raid. And that was named by the federal government, the Celebras raid, that happened in 2008, 2009-ish in the Four Corners area, focused in Blanding, Utah, where 24 homes got raided at 5:30, 6:30 in the morning by 17 different SWAT teams with guns over Indian artifacts, over Indian hobbyist collectors. The government hired a character named Ted Gardner, who was the Bureau of Land Management's confidential informant that they paid $244,000 to over a 2-year period, that set up these 24 collectors to justify he was an ex-drug addict, a felon. And they inspired him to set up 24 people for probable cause search warrants. And they raided these homes. Out of this raid, Celebras action, 3 people committed suicide. Dr. Red, a Mormon doctor who delivered over 4,000 babies, who was 69 years old, was confronted by one of the Bureau of Land Management agents, Dan Love, who told him during the raid that you're going to lose your medical license, you're going to forfeit your property, you're never going to see your family again. That evening, he took his Jeep down to the family pond on his estate, and he asphyxiated himself and took his own life. A week later, a teacher who was raided committed suicide. Ted Gardner, the federal informant, 3 days before the first federal trial, went to federal court, shot himself in the head. Let's go to some current events. I sued 24 federal agents in the Court of Claims in Washington, D.C., and was thrown out of court because you can't sue the sovereign. The main reason I wanted to do that is to air their dirty laundry in federal court, so it was a federal record, all of the injustices and the crimes they committed against my constitutional rights during this raid here. I won't get into the particulars of all of that now, but we do have a press release on our website that you can go to custermuseum.org and read more about it. Speed this up to current events. 2 years ago, I sued the federal government and received all of my eagle feather war bonds back for the museum, and all the Indian artifacts came back because they weren't contraband. They weren't an item involved in a crime. So I pushed the federal government through the legal channels to return all the items to the museum, even though they wanted me to forfeit them. I thought this was all behind me. I've been writing a book about all my stories I'm telling you now.
Yeah.
I get a phone call 3 weeks ago from Dr. Red's son, who is a dentist living in Utah. And he says, and I've become friends with him over the last 5 years. A reporter introduced us. And he said, Chris, have you heard about the current Bureau of Land Management raid? I go, no. He said, there was one in Cody, Wyoming, which is 90 miles from Garryowen, Montana. He said his name was Bob Weaver. Bob Weaver took his own life December 31st, 2016, after an overzealous Bureau of Land Management team interrogated him and belittled him and threatened him with federal crimes over him picking up a rock which wasn't even taken from federal lands. So that's why I currently did a press release, because this is the 4th suicide that has happened from Bureau of Land Management raids. These are over-the-top, zealous federal agents that need to be reined in. Representative Jason Chaffetz of Utah has reintroduced one of his bills, January 24th, to demilitarize the Bureau of Land Management, and right now it has 6 co-sponsors. He tried to get it introduced a year ago, but we had a Democratic House and it didn't go anywhere. I testified in front of Congress through written testimony in 2014 when I was asked by an elected official from Utah to tell my story to a oversight committee, and the name of the oversight hearing was Bullying by Land Management Agencies. I mean, it was like a gift from God. I couldn't believe that was the title of the hearing after what I went through. So I spoke out then in 2014, and now since there's a 4th suicide, I'm speaking out now, hopefully to prevent a 5th suicide. So I'm asking all of the listeners, if they agree that we don't need federal police on our federal property inside the United States, It's owned by us. It's owned by the U.S. citizens. It's not owned by the federal agents. All of our laws should be enforced by our county sheriffs and our state police.
Yes.
We don't need federal police here. President Trump just signed an executive order in the last 15 days to hire 5,000 more ICE and Border Patrol agents. He vowed to take the funding from other federal agencies to help pay for those agents.
I'm thinking the BLM should be defunded immediately. What do you think?
Bureau of Land Management needs to be totally defunded. They get $125 million for their law enforcement every 12 months. Every October 31st, they get refunded. Some of these agents make in between $80,000 and $125,000 a year. It wasn't too long ago that the President of the United States was getting paid $125,000 a year. So what happened after 9/11 was President Bush Sr., President Bush W. signed a bill to empower every cabinet head's agency to have their own federal police department. That's how this monster got created. They are justifying their actions through these raids because they don't want to lose their funding in front of Congress. I reported to the Office of Inspector General all the indiscretions that were committed during my raids here by federal agents of the Bureau of Land Management. Nothing ever happened from that OIG report except some federal agents got transferred out of the BLM. I believe, and then I received the 54-page document linking the Gibson Guitar raid, the Bureau of Land Management raid, and the Four Corners raid all together, which I published on my press release and gave to Congress in 2014 at the congressional hearing. The common denominator for those three raids was the head of the Bureau of Land Management and Federal Fish and Wildlife, a gentleman's last name is Woody, ordered for high-profile raids to be conducted so he would get national publicity, so they could spend more money on these raids, so they could get more appropriations from Congress and keep their funding going. Very sick that we citizens that have no criminal background, that are taxpayers, that pay for these federal agents' wages, have to put up with this type of over-the-top law enforcement behavior. It's time to call our congressmen and tell them to back Representative Chaffetz Bill 622 to demilitarize our Department of the Interior federal law enforcement. President Trump needs us to back that bill to help support him in more Border Patrol and more ICE agents to protect our borders and protect the security of the United States.
Chris, I don't think people understand that when you have this bunch of rabble, I mean, I'm just going to toss out some stuff here and then stay out of your way in anticipation of your response. First of all, you have this very vocal, retarded, thinking, progressive group that commit these acts of what they think are civil disobedience, but in fact they're criminal acts. Then the police department is instructed to stand down. And there are reports of men in black provocateurs getting them jacked up. We also know, certainly according to Dr. Daryl Hamamoto, University of California, Davis, that Berkeley is real tight in the military-industrial complex, real tight. And they have various techniques for agitating protesters to the point where they become rioters. Now, we set that aside for a second. All this thank you for your service stuff, if I'm drafted, I expect somebody to thank me for my service. If I volunteer to go and get into the stuff, a lot of these people go into the service. I'm using the words, a lot of people, because they want to get into conflict and combat. It's a legal way of killing people. So, if they want to be thanked for their service, why don't you join one of the undercover agencies agencies, join CIA, join FBI, and go hunt down some terrorists before they pull an Orlando or a San Bernardino or anything else that might actually be real rather than some staged event like this Sandy Hook thing. So I'm revealing, my opinions of these various things as this goes along. But isn't it interesting? See, my view of this in listening, actually, mein Herz brennt a little bit when I hear you speak, because only a damn coward would go and take his machine gun and go wave it around a museum like that. That's a real soft target. You don't need a machine gun for that. What you need a machine gun for is going into Detroit to bust up a drug ring, or going to Chicago and find the guys that are leaving the full automatic AK-47s lying around in the neighborhoods and bringing all that cocaine in. The problem is that this country is losing its moral foundation altogether. And I can just imagine if they're doing this now, if they're behaving this way now, what's it going to be like if we really do descend a couple of notches into some leftist mentality-fueled civil unrest that's really going to let those dogs off the chain? What's going to happen then? And I can't help but notice, just like with the Bundy Ranch, with those, now we're going to come at you with the courts, and now we're going to ruin your life, and now we're going to punish you and shoot you and everything else. But I'll tell you what, when the citizens show up with their rifles, those SOBs just shut the bleep up real quick and go away, because they're afraid. They're afraid that what they are prepared to visit upon the unarmed citizenry may damned well be visited upon them, and they don't want that. So, as far as all that nobility of being men in arms and brothers in arms and all that, put my ration in the poop can over there. I think it's just savagery and barbarism, and I can't stomach it. We have changed. Maybe it's always been this way to some degree. I feel certain that it has been. But when are rational minds going to prevail, and when are these idiots going to, on the one hand, get the attention that they deserve in exposing them as idiots? Witness Nancy Pelosi, who thinks President Bush is still in office. Witness Maxine Waters, who thinks that Putin's invading Korea. I mean, when are we going to have some people with an IQ above room temperature running this thing and getting these people with this propensity for violence to be turned against the citizenry? When are we going to get them under control? What's it going to take? I'm thinking that we are at the very cusp of a new American revolution, and I got a feeling it's going to be ugly if it goes that way. And I don't see how it cannot go that way at this point. There are forces that are compelling this to happen, and I don't think that they're forces necessarily for good. I think good people are getting dragged into it, and they're going to be forced to take action. I'll back off now for a second.
We need to support Representative Chaffetz's bill, H.R. 622, to demilitarize the Bureau of Land Management. That's the first step. Keep in mind, we have a Republican House and Senate and a Republican president that wants to give back to the people of the United States. That's what he campaigned on. This is a no-brainer. This is our only chance to do this. There's 4 suicides by the Bureau of Land Management. Do I need to say anything else? Now, I've had some reporters say, you can't directly relate those suicides to the Bureau of Land Management. But Dr. Red's case by his estate is in the 10th Circuit, or in federal court right now, for a wrongful death suit. So I'm not making this up. These people just didn't coincidentally go out and kill themselves after they were raided or involved with the Bureau of Land Management. Bureau of Land Management? Suicides?
Yeah.
Representative Chaffetz bill, H.R. 622. Call your congressman. Look it up on the internet. We need to defund the Bureau of Land Management. If there's something wrong, they should give you a civil summons. I want to mention one more thing. Archaeological Resource Protection Act, acronym ARPA. 1977, it was passed from Congress. President Carter wouldn't sign the bill unless they put a provision in for surface fines. President Carter was a Boy Scout troop leader. He remembered taking his troops out and finding little arrowheads. And he thought, this is America. We can't be taking rockhounds away, even if they find an arrowhead. So he made them put a provision in there about surface fines, meaning if you can kick it up with your shoe, or if it's on top of the soil, it's finders keeper, even on federal lands. But the federal agents are so zealous, they interpret surface fines the way they want to. You know, was dirt on top of it? Was dirt not on top of it? Did you kick it hard enough? Did you kick it a couple times before it popped up? Whatever the case is, they don't look at that provision in ARPA, that exclusion for surface fines. My point is, there's so many laws on the book that if they want to target somebody, there's a federal law that you probably broke today. I was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I would ask people to look this article up and read about it, about all the indiscretions, not only against me, but other U.S. citizens. Just Google Kortlander, Kortlander, Wall Street Journal, and you can read about 10 other instances. One of them was a woman who was walking along an eastern coast beach line and picked up a small piece of coral off of the sand. Took it home, had it in her home for a year or two, and thought she would sell it on eBay. So she listed this piece of coral on eBay, and she was raided by NOAA, National Oceanographic Federal Government SWAT team, for selling this piece of coral on eBay. So I'm just letting you people, the listeners, our U.S. citizens, know that these federal agencies that were funded after 9/11 want to keep their funding. It's all about the money. It's all about their salary and their wages. If they can't justify their existence, they're going to go out of business. We need to help them go out of business, and we need to give President Trump our full support on building the wall and getting more agents for our borders to keep Americans safe from our enemies, not police the citizens inside this United States that are taxpayers, that pay to our tax base, that fund these federal terrorist agents.
Well, I'll tell you, it's really maddening, and maybe the maddening is overdue. I mean, look at that disaster up there in Burns, Oregon, at the Mount Hur. I mean, they just murdered Robert Finnegan and shot him in the back.
Bureau of Land Management, Dan Love was the lead agent. There was an Office of Inspector General report that came out 1 week ago over Dan Love and his his wrongdoings at Burning Man. You know, the event that happens.
What happened at Burning Man?
Right. And his conduct was totally misappropriate and illegal, where he was, I won't get into the whole situation, but I encourage your listeners to Google Dan Love, L-O-V-E, Bureau of Land Management, Office of Inspector General report, released 1 week ago. He was promoted out of the Blanding raid after he told Dr. Red he was going to use his medical license and he was going to forfeit his property. When Dr. Red took his own life, Agent Dan Love told the Red family, "Your father took one for the team."
Oh, really?
Federal court record, that quote. The Bureau of Land Management promoted Dan Love created a whole brand new office that's never been created before, a brand new position titled Chief Intelligence Officer for Bureau of Land Management for the United States. They promoted him, created an office that wasn't never there before. Now there's an OIG report. Office of Inspector General is the federal arm of the internal police for our federal police departments. They did a report on Dan Love that they just released 1 week ago. It's on my press release. I encourage everybody to read that report. It's a 17-page report about Dan Love's misconduct. I think he should be fired, and I think he should be investigated. He's the one, the instigator, for Bundy. He was the lead agent in Bundy and involved in Lavoy Finicum's death during the Oregon standoff. Remember the name Dan Love. Google OIG report Dan Love.
I've written it all down.
And the links are on my press release. This has all come together in the last 15 days. And if it wasn't for Bob Weaver's suicide in Cody, you and I, December 31st of 2016 in Cody, Wyoming, you and I would not be talking about this right now. So he took his own life, and I want to dedicate this show to him, that we can bring this to the forefront of the American people. And Representative Chaffetz bill, H.R. 622, to defund the Bureau of Land Management. It's very important. This is our chance with our Republican House, Congress, and the executive branch to defund the Bureau of Land Management. We do not need federal police policing our U.S. citizens.
No, we don't.
To keep our enemies outside of our United States of America.
That's right. Well, you know, the Department of Education is on the chopping block right now. The UN is on the chopping block right now. Why not the BLM? And in fact, some of these people who have inflicted this kind of grief that would actually force somebody into suicide, I think that they should be subjected to civil action. It'll cost them everything they have just to respond to the paperwork before they even get into a courtroom, and effectively strip them of their assets and drive them into destitution. Who do these people think they are?
Absolutely. Well, in answer to your question, they think they're God.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. This is really disturbing. I thought we were going to talk about Indians today. I knew we weren't.
Once you get that gold badge with U.S. agent on it,
yeah.
And I'm not talking about FBI, U.S. Marshals, DEA. I'm talking about our Department of the Interior federal law enforcement is out of control.
That's insane. I mean, who would ever have thought such a thing was even possible? That's like having the snow cone driver. It turns out to be, the serial killer maniac in the whole town that's been doing it for 20 years. I mean, this is crazy. It really is.
I'm very fortunate to be the only one out of the Gibson Guitar raid, the Custer Battlefield Museum raid, the Four Corners raid, and the Cody, Wyoming raid. I'm the only person that was never charged with a crime, never indicted, never pled guilty, never paid a fine, and never committed suicide. This is my life mission to tell my story so a fifth suicide does not occur, and our federal government and our executive branch are aware of the indiscretions of the Bureau of Land Management.
Chris, just for the hell of it, what was the button and what was the buckle that the machine guns were brought out to recover?
Well, I was focused on for a raid, and they couldn't get anything on me here, so they sent an undercover agent in to sell me a button and suspender buckle that were micro-dotted on the back.
Set up.
Oh, it was total entrapment, but it backfired on them because I never pled guilty to a crime. Their MO is to put so much pressure on you when they're pointing a gun at your head, literally, that you will plead guilty to a lesser crime so they don't have to go to a federal trial in front of a federal judge. I stood up to them. I not only stood up to them, I sued them after I got a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office that the case is closed, there will be no indictment, there will be no charges, and then within 2 months, I sued 24 federal agents in the Court of Claims in Washington, D.C.
Wow. Court of Claims in Washington, D.C. I'm writing that down, too. This is extraordinary.
It is.
I mean, this is.
And if Bob Weaver's suicide did not occur about 6 weeks ago, you and I would not be speaking right now.
Tell us his name again so that we all remember it.
Weaver, W-E-A-V-E-R.
For whatever reason, you just got totally blanked out. Say it again.
Robert or Bob Weaver, W-E-A-V-E-R, Weaver. Cody, Wyoming, Bureau of Land Management. If you just Google that, the articles will come up.
Golly. Wow.
I've been working with an Associated Press reporter over the last week who is going to be breaking this story nationwide, hopefully within the next week.
That sounds pretty good. So just to restate the obvious, it should be obvious by now. Your mission now, as a result of these suicides and this obnoxious, outrageous, and criminal, might I add, behavior, is to defund these people and run them out of business.
Absolutely. Why do we need federal police policing our federal lands that families go to in the forest and out in the wilderness? Why do we need a park ranger with a gun coming up to us and explaining or telling us what we can or can't do, or a Bureau of Land Management agent trying to, raid your home over something that can be done civilly? I'm not saying that we shouldn't be held accountable, but we shouldn't have a gun pointed at us when we have no criminal background over something as minuscule as a rock or a plant.
Or a button with a microdot on it.
I mean, give us a civil complaint, a civil summons. We'll go to court, we'll defend ourselves, but why come in and take down interns with M16s? I mean, I'd like to hear somebody's argument against this. There's no guns at Gibson Guitar Factory.
No.
This is the Custer Battlefield Museum. We're the tomb of the United States unknown soldier. We're host to over 50,000 people a year that come here every year in 4 months. We see 50,000 people. The Little Bighorn National Monument down the road sees 400,000 people a year come here to see what happened from the Battle of the Little Bighorn.
Chris, I'm a little bit concerned. Why would people, that's got to be an immense amount of pressure to actually drive someone to kill themselves? That's why I feel a life mission to be the spokesperson for the decedents.
I was in that boat. I was emotionally distraught in front of my attorney. I went into my attorney's office on 3 different occasions, and I was crying, telling her to plead me out to some crime. I couldn't do this anymore. Because every month, we would get a call from the United States Attorney's Office in Montana and saying that the grand jury is convening the 3rd Thursday of every month in Billings. And Kortlander is going to be indicted unless he pleads to a lesser crime. Here's the deal this month. I went through that for 4 years and 8 months.
4 years and 8 months.
They have 5 years to charge you on a federal crime after a raid. Then after the raid was over, I wanted to see the application for search warrant, which is the piece of paper when the federal agent goes to the federal judge or magistrate and raises his hand and says, I swear in front of you, these facts are true and correct. And when I wanted to see the application for search warrant, why they had probable cause to come in here guns a-blazing, I was told by Judge Richard Siebel that I couldn't see that document. This is after the U.S. Attorney's Office gave me a letter saying there's no indictments, the case are closed. And I thought, is this America or is this Nazi Germany? I can't see a court document on a case that's closed. I was never charged with the crime. So my great attorney, Penny Strong, appealed the case to the Ninth Circuit. Your listeners can Google Kortlander with a K, Kortlander, Ninth Circuit, and read when we overturned Judge Siebel's decision. Now the law is, if you're raided by the federal government, and if you're never charged with the crime, you have a right to see the application for search warrant and see why the federal agents swore in front of a federal judge that they had probable cause for the federal judge to sign that search warrant.
And did you see it?
Absolutely. It's going to be in my book.
What does it say?
It's very complicated, but
Okay.
that's why I sued 24 federal agents in Washington, D.C., because they lied to the federal judge in 7 different instances to get the application for search warrant. So if they lied to a federal judge and they're willing to put their career on the line They're hoping to get an indictment. They're hoping to get me to plead guilty. That's why they were threatening me so long. They wanted me to cave in. They wanted me to plead guilty. I was seeing a counselor for depression. They wanted me to forfeit my town. They were threatening I wasn't going to see my handicapped boy anymore. And I was going to go to prison for the rest of my life. What did I have to live for?
You weren't going to be able to see who anymore?
My handicapped son.
Oh, right. Wow, what a bunch of sadists, man.
If it wasn't for my attorney, Penny Strong, in Billings, Montana, who sat me down and said, Chris, I'm not going to plead you to a crime you never committed. I wouldn't be speaking to you two right now because I would be innocently pleading to a lesser crime to get the monkey off my back, to get the 800-pound gorilla out of the room. I was there, but I didn't commit suicide. I was right there. I was right there. But I'm here to talk about it. And I was never charged with the crime.
So over a button and a belt buckle, they were prepared to destroy your life.
They did. A button and a suspender buckle. Keep in mind that since I was never indicted, I never had the right for a speedy trial. I was never under the judicial branch because the law enforcement, the Bureau of Land Management's under the executive branch until they indict you, and then you switch from executive to judicial when the clock starts for a speedy trial. So they didn't indict me, but they persecuted me for 4 years and 8 months, hoping I was going to cave in and plead guilty to a crime. If they would have indicted me, which we asked them to do on numerous times, we said to them, we're not pleading guilty to a crime. Indict him so we can get in front of a jury. They wouldn't do it. They started off with 9 felonies, 6 felonies, 3 felonies, 1 felony, and then they dropped it to 2 misdemeanors. Then they dropped it to 1 misdemeanor. Then they dropped it to no charges at all. Then they came to me afterwards and wanted me to be an informant against other people, which I denied.
They're saying, was that an afterthought or was that the objective from the beginning? I mean, what did they want? I mean, why this elaborate?
They wanted publicity
Okay, gotcha.
National publicity. During one of my raids, when a federal government agency raids you, they bring in U.S. Postal Inspector, Park Service. They bring in other federal agencies. One of them they brought in was the FBI office from Billings, who I had a good rapport from my previous law enforcement and from me owning a town here in a federal Indian reservation. And one of the agents turned around to me. They brought FBI agents in without guns a-blazing. They were here to seize my computers because they were computer specialists. And one of the agents turned around to me during the raid and said, Chris, I want to let you know this is not the FBI doing this to you. We were asked to be here just to secure your computers. This isn't about the FBI. This is about our Department of the Interior Police that are overzealous and come in here guns a-blazing and hope they can make you plead guilty to a crime that you didn't commit so they can keep their job and they can get their big green paycheck every 2 weeks. They have to justify their existence under these exotic laws that should be civil with no criminal provision.
I mean, this is straight out of Kafka's The Trial, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, it really is.
It's absolutely out of control, a waste of federal taxpayer dollars.
Well,
our law enforcement should be with our county sheriff and our state police. That's who should enforce the laws of the state that you live in. If the federal government really has a bone to pick with you, they should call in either the FBI or the U.S. Marshals. We don't need Bureau of Land Management police. They're the ones that caused Bundy, and they're the ones that caused Lefroy Vinicum to be murdered by the federal government. And it was Agent Dan Love of the Bureau of Land Management that was the head of both of those operations.
Did you say Dan Love?
Dan Love, L-O-V.
Yep. I thought I misheard his last name again. Well, is this Do we get the sense that these are just the cases we know about? Is this going on all the time and we just don't hear about it?
Wall Street Journal article, Kortlander, Kortlander, Google that. And that article was written 4 years ago. And basically the article is the over array of federal laws that are out of control and lists 10 different situations. I'm one of the 10. This goes on all the time. But when we have a forced suicide in my backyard, and I was going to be one of those people possibly to take their own life over what happened to me, over the pressure the federal government put on an innocent person, I feel a duty to speak out and to be a spokesman for the decedents of the Bureau of Land Management law enforcement team. Why do these people go in like they do? They want to make a name for themselves. They should be working, like I said, for a high-profile law enforcement agency, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, Los Angeles Police Department. If you want to do good and protect people and get criminals off the street, go to work for one of those agencies.
Well, the problem with that is, of course, that there's no job for them if they get the criminals off the street. You can go back to Ayn Rand with that. There's no money in a well-ordered, law-abiding society. Everybody knows that.
Absolutely.
Well, Chris, it looks like the damn devil really does run this place, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? But I think we have a new sheriff in the White House.
I think we do too. Good Lord, what a story. I gotta tell you, I knew there was something coming, but I didn't know it was something coming of this magnitude. Even when I saw the documents, it was like, oh dear, this is going to be interesting. But I had no idea that there's such an abuse of power involved. I mean, we know that this happens, but it's one thing to know it, and it's quite another thing to no, look at it. Look at it. Look what happened. Look what happened to the people involved. It's not just a story on a piece of paper. That's just the written account. Get into it and try and understand what these people actually experience. That's a hell of a thing when you drive somebody. So one person being driven to suicide, it's like, well, maybe that person was unstable. But when you've got a string of bodies like this, there's something desperately wrong. That's stating the obvious, I suppose, but I had to state it.
Wouldn't you think after my federal lawsuit suing federal agents in Washington, D.C., wouldn't you think that Bureau of Land Management would retrain their agents to be a little bit more civil?
Yeah.
But I guess not. But thank God for the Office of Inspector General who finally did a report on the Bureau of Land Management. This is a new report that just was released in the last 2 weeks. I encourage all your listeners to Google Dan Love, LOVEOIG report, and read about him, and read what his involvement with Bundy. He's the main agent being sued by the Red family for the wrongful death of Dr. Red, who took his own life in the Four Corners raid. We're speaking of a Mormon doctor who is 69 years old, who is a community doctor in small communities in Utah.
And why did they raid him?
Over an artifact that was less than 1/8 of an inch long. And there's a picture of that artifact that you can see on my press release.
How do you even find an artifact that's less than 1/8 of an inch long? I mean,
there's a picture of it. It's a little tiny piece of bone.
Oh, Lord.
And that's what he was raided for. I want to also mention that Senator Hatch, when Eric Holder, our United States Attorney General, was in office at that time,
I'm
during
shocked.
the investigative committee, Senator Hatch reeled on Eric Holder over the raid and over Dr. Red's suicide. That YouTube video is on my press release. If anybody would like to watch the 6-minute clip, I would encourage them to go there to see Senator Hatch drill Eric Holder on Dr. Red's death.
Well, what's the link? What do we type into the search bar?
Custer Battlefield Museum press release will bring you to my press release with 10 clickable links on the bottom of my press release.
Okay. Wow.
So that was 3 or 4 years ago. Nothing's changed. We had a suicide in Cody, Wyoming, December 31st. Robert Weaver, no criminal record, killed himself after intense interrogation by a Bureau of Land Management agent over what? A rock? Are you kidding me? A rock? Where are we going with all this?
Well,
Remember, the bill to defund is in Congress right now. The stars will never be lined up again. The OIG report is out 10 days ago.
what's give me the number of the bill again, Chris?
HR 622.
Okay, I just want everybody to get this.
To give law enforcement back to our sheriffs and the state police and take it out of federal policing. It's very important.
All right, let me ask you this. What does it get?
I want to mention one more thing.
Okay.
Even for the people that don't think this involves them, think about our future generations. Think about your grandchildren. Think about where our nation's going. We don't need federal police, the Department of the Interior, policing taxpayers and our citizens so they can justify their existence for their paycheck. That's why we have county sheriffs, and that's why we have state police.
Now let me ask you this: what is the mechanism? So this HR 622, this is the bill we want passed. This is the bill to defund. Yes.
Yes, this is the only chance that we have, because the stars will never be lined up again like they are today.
And what steps must be can be taken by citizens to do this? Call their
You call a representative and make them aware of Representative Chaffetz's bill.
Okay.
By the way, Chaffetz was with Trump yesterday in the White House to talk about reform. His office did not even know of the suicide until I called them yesterday. And the bill was created way before Bob Weaver took his own life. So I was on the phone with Chaffetz's press secretary yesterday in Washington, D.C., and I informed them of this most recent suicide. I also contacted everybody in the federal delegation in Montana and the federal delegation in Wyoming. And everybody I spoke to in every office was not aware of Robert Weaver taking his life after a Bureau of Land Management interrogation in Cody, Wyoming, December 31st, 2016.
All right, that's Robert Weaver, and he what was his?
He was retired. He was an amateur archaeologist.
Okay, and the Mormon doctor, what's his name?
Pardon? Repeat.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't know why, but every time I say something, it just totally shuts off your audio. I've never seen this before. What is the name of the Mormon doctor? I can't quite get all the consonants.
Dr. Red, spelled R-E-D-D.
What's his first name?
Can't recall offhand.
All right, that's all right.
If you want to Google that right now, it'll pop right up.
All right. Well, this is ghastly. Now let me ask you this: what kind of?
You could also Google RED, R-E-D-D, versus Bureau of Land Management, and the federal case will pop up, and you can read the federal case that's in the federal court system today.
Okay. Now, what's the timeline for getting this bill passed? When's it come up?
It's just got introduced January 24th, 2017, about 10 days ago.
Okay, so we're thinking that they might move on it when? Is there any way of knowing?
No way of knowing. It's just we need more co-sponsors. We need more support from the U.S. citizens.
Okay, what are you doing Saturday night?
I'm available.
Okay, I'll have Ken get in touch. I want you to come on midnight.
Okay, I just need a detailed email explaining everything, and I can make that happen.
All right. All right, very good. Wow. I would ask you if there's anything to add, but I'm not sure we could withstand it.
There is a couple of other stories, but I don't know if you want it. If you want, I can go into it now.
Sure.
A week after the raid, I got a phone call from the White House when Obama was in the White House, from the Chief of Staff, from Rob Emanuel's Chief of Staff, telling me that Joe Medicine Crow, who was on our board of directors here, at 96 years old, the oldest living Crow male Indian. His grandfather was Custer's scout. White man runs him. And he was the last living person with direct oral history to a battle participant in the Custer Battle. He went to USC in 1936. And he was the first educated Crow Indian getting a master's degree in 1936. And he decided during World War II to join the Army and go fight for our freedoms, putting his PhD on the back burner. He came back and he became the Crow historian most of his life. My father, my adopted father, was a doctorate from USC, and it took a doctor to nominate for an honorary doctor degree. We nominated Joe Medicine Crow for an honorary doctorate in 2004 at USC, and he was bestowed that award upon him. Then he was featured in Ken Burns, you know, the HBO producer.
Oh, yes.
The World War II Heroes.
Yes.
Joe Medicine Crow was featured for 10 minutes on that program. I got a phone call from the president of France's office back in the 2009-2010 that they wanted to bestow the French Legion of Metal honor upon Joe Medicine Crow. And they were going to send a delegation from France. And I hosted that event and that award ceremony here behind the tomb of the unknown soldier here at Garryowen. And this is all during my criminal investigation nightmare that I was under. We found out in researching Joe Medicine Crow's background that he earned the Bronze Star in World War II, but was never received it. So I contacted a retired two-star general who lived in Roundup, Montana, General Funk, who came down here to pin the Bronze Star on Joe, and while the French delegation was here, pinning the French Legion of Honor medal on Joe also.
Excellent.
After that, I nominated Joe during the Bush administration for the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He didn't receive it. But a week after I got the closure letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office, I got a call from the Chief of Staff of the White House saying that Joe Medicine Crow was asked to come to the White House to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Joe Medicine Crow. And since Joe was deaf, I'm the director of the museum, and I was to accompany Joe back to the White House for this award ceremony in 2008. So I was pretty giddy when I got this phone call and drove 15 miles into the reservation to knock on Joe's door. And I said, President Obama wants to see you at the White House. He wants to give you the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He said, that's great. Let's go. I get a phone call 10 days later from the head of the Secret Service detail of the White House. And he asked me a question. He goes, Mr. Kortlander, Joe Medicine Crow or his entourage, you're not planning to bring any eagle feather war bonds to the White House, are you?
No, brother.
And I said, absolutely. Joe's going to be in full regalia. He's going to be wearing his eagle feather war bonnet. He's the last Plains Indian chief alive. And his grandfather scouted for General Custer, one of our allies. And he told me, we don't want contraband in the White House. That's going to be a problem. We're going to ask you to ask Joe not to wear the war bonnet. Well, knowing Joe, I wasn't going to rile him up at 96 years old. But I felt the duty to inform him 2 or 3 days later. And Joe told me this, since he couldn't talk on the phone, he was deaf. He said, Chris, you call Obama. You tell him I'm not going to come to the Presidential Medal of Freedom Award, but I will be I will come to the White House. I'll be on the sidewalk outside the White House the day that he bestows the other Presidential Medal of Freedoms. And I'll be in full regalia, wearing my eagle feather war bonnet, and I'll explain to the American people the reason I'm not inside that White House receiving the award. So I relayed this information to the Secret Service, and they said, whoa, 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 whoa. I said, give me 24 hours. I received a phone call that afternoon. It said, Mr. Kortlander, we're looking forward to see Dr. Joseph Medicine Crow in his eagle feather war bonnet at the White House. So another interesting story. Joe didn't have an eagle feather war bonnet because he gave it to Ted Turner. Remember when Ted Turner donated $1 billion to the United Nations?
Oh, yes.
Over a 10-year period?
Yep.
Called upon Joe Medicine Crow to address the United Nations because Ted Turner brought in all the indigenous religious leaders to the United Nations that day, and Joe gave his war bonnet to Ted Turner. So I lent one of the museum war bonnets to Joe that was raided and captured by the Bureau of Land Management that I retrieved back from the raid. And I let him wear that war bonnet in the White House with pictures with Joe Medicine Crow and Obama. Anybody can Google that and see the war bonnet. When he got back, I called my criminal defense attorney. My case was closed. And I said, Penny, I want to get a Christmas card made, a picture Christmas card of me, Obama, and Joe wearing that war bonnet, and I want to send it to all 24 federal agents and the U.S. attorney that investigated me, and write on there that President Obama enjoyed the eagle feather war bonnet that Joe was wearing that was lent by the Custer Battlefield Museum for the award ceremony. And she said to me, I think that's an excellent idea. So that's what I did. I went to Costco. I got up, I had Christmas cards made, the photography Christmas cards with me, Obama, and Joe. And I mailed them to each one of the agents at their office and to the U.S. Attorney's office with that inscription in gold ink on the front, and I signed it.
Wow, this is really amazing. You know, this has been going on. Let me ask you something. These incidents occurred over the last 5 years. But how long has this sort of BLM shenanigan, how long has this been going on? Long time?
Well, I only can speak of 2005. But I can tell you this. Remember when I told you I was selling to the Autry Museum?
Yeah.
And the NAGPRA, Native American Graves Repatriation Act?
Yes.
That's the enforceable act that's given to the Bureau of Land Management to enforce. It has civil provisions and criminal provisions. It should never have criminal provisions. If someone does something wrong under that act, they should give you a civil subpoena to go to federal court, not send the BLM in with M16s.
I mean, that's insane.
It's insane. So when you say, when did this start? NAGPRA, Native American Graves Repatriation Act, 1991. Bureau of Land Management, 911 happened when in 1993, right? When did 911 happen? I'm sorry, 2001?
Yeah, 01.
01. That's when all this federal funding came in to federal law enforcement. And so each agency, Federal Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Land Management, the board agents in the office read the laws. They only read the first 4 pages. They don't read all 300 pages with all the rules behind them. And then they come raid you. So for me, they were raiding me like I accept federal funding. Because there was a whole set of laws 2 inches thick that would have applied to my institution. But I had the knowledge enough, because of the Autry's were one of my clients, never to accept money from the federal government. You hear about sanctuary cities being defunded by President Trump because they accept federal funding. They better do what the federal government wants. Same thing happens to museums. You take money from the government, you got rules. I mean, it's a different standard for sanctuary cities, of course, but I'm giving you two examples. You take money from the government, you better comply and read the rules that will be over you by accepting 1 penny of federal funding.
Oh, yeah.
So we did this all with private funding and with some state fundraising. No federal money here. So when I was raided, and I explained to these young federal agents in their 20s, early 30s, about NAGPRA, I said, have you read the whole law? Have you read all this CFR, all the codes that support the rules and the laws behind the law? Of course they wouldn't answer me. Well, thank God I did. I did my homework even before I put a shovel in the ground here to build this facility in 1993. I hired an attorney. I got briefed on all the federal laws, all the eagle feather laws. We have over 13 war bonnets in our museum collection. I got them all returned from our federal government. They wanted me to go to prison for possession of these eagle feather war bonnets. They wanted me to go to prison because I'm preserving history and educating the public. They wanted me to go to prison to justify their federal law enforcement existence inside the Department of the Interior. They wanted Chris Kortlander to be an example so they could justify their little gold badge they got at the Federal Law Enforcement Academy. Keep in mind, I support law enforcement, even federal law enforcement. But the Department of the Interior federal law enforcement is out of control. Congressman Zinke is a Navy SEAL Team 6 commander. He is now going to be the Secretary of the Interior. He was our congressman here in Montana, a one-term congressman. Now Trump has handpicked him to head the Department of the Interior. Confirmed here within the next week.
You know, there is so much.
Podcast is timely.
You know, there's so much crossover. But now, this may be just a wild, speculative, outrageous thing to say, but, gee, do we think it's just a coincidence, just an interesting coincidence, that the Democrats are going insane over all of Mr. Trump's appointments?
Absolutely.
I think those bastards are crooked. I think they redefine crooked. We know Harry Reid and Pelosi and her husband, the lawyer, all this crossover in the Clintons and everything else. And I'm not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination, let alone stretching a so-called fact, that the Republicans are lily white. But I'm telling you, I'm convinced that the Democrats are absolutely sewage dirty.
Absolutely. Harry Reid from Nevada is wrapped up with Dan Love, the BLM agent, because he owns property, and he had the BLM do things for him, and you can Google that. Just Harry Reid, BLM, Dan Love, you can read all about it.
How I wish I was king. Oh man, there'd be a bunch in the tower. They'd be lined up at the block with the axeman who was going to make some money that day.
Absolutely.
I'm telling you, these rats just need to go down hard. I'm serious. Some of them, I believe, need to be, and somehow, you know, because they're connected, even if they get in a lot of trouble, they'll still be all right. I'm telling you, I think these people should be driven into destitution. They have caused misery and death, and they just walk. They just walk. No big deal, because they're connected. They're important.
They get walking, they get a paycheck that's green every 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well,
let's hope that the 4 suicides were for a good reason that can change our United States to the better.
okay, so that's Robert Weaver, Dr. Donald E. Red, and who are the other people?
Ted Gardner was the federal informant, and the other third one is slipping my mind, but if you read Four Corners Raid Suicide.
Okay.
Also, during the Celebras raid afterwards, the FBI and the BLM helped conduct those raids. I don't know if you know what a military challenge coin is.
Yeah, I do.
Well, they made a challenge coin for the Celebris raid. They were so proud of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so they spent $40,000 making these coins to hand out to all the federal agents for a good job well done.
On what incident was this coin made?
Well, the Four Corners raid was turned Celebris, which is a mythical monster back in the medieval time.
Yeah.
With a C, and it's called the Celebris Action, is another name for the Four Corners raid. That's the official federal term that they named the Four Corner raid, the Celebris Action.
Is that CELEBRUS?
That's correct. And they made a challenge coin and gave it to every agent involved for a job well done.
Now, which four corners are we talking about?
It's called the Four Corners raid because it happened near the Four Corners in Blanding, Utah.
Okay, gotcha. Wow. CK, I didn't have any idea I was walking into this one this morning. Wow, what an extraordinary story.
An extraordinary story that there's a bill to defund the federal law enforcement, Bureau of Land Management in the last 2 weeks. What a coincidence that there's an OIG report on the Bureau of Land Management in the last week. What a coincidence that President Trump wants to hire 5,000 more agents and sign an executive order that he can take from other federal agencies to fund, to make our to help our security on our boundaries, to keep us citizens of the United States safe. What a coincidence that Robert Weaver was raided by the Bureau of Land Management and took his life, that we're here to talk about his death in hopes that things will change inside of our system to the better for the U.S. citizens. There's a lot of coincidences coming together. Now that we have a Republican House and a Republican Senate, and we have a new sheriff in the White House, this is our chance to make everything happen.
All right. You're scheduled for Saturday night, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, I just got the notification, so we're going to blow this stuff out all over the place, and I don't know how many people view it, but I know that it gets shared over 750,000 times. So a lot of people are going to find out about this.
Excellent.
Because we stream it over Facebook, and then it goes onto our YouTube channel. So word's going to get out. I think people need to understand. Look, this is the time for action. I understand there are only so many words, folks. There are only so many words, and you're going to hear these word combinations over and over and over again until you're sick of it. And in some cases, you'll hear them so often that they just cease to have any meaning. Your ears are just numb to it. But I'm telling you, I'll tell you two things, and one of them is in the form of a question. What makes you think that you were not born for a time such as this? What makes you think that you're not here right now because of what's happening right now? We must all engage. This is not going to go away. It is not going to get better on its own. The higher virtues and ideals are not going to overwhelm the darkness that is trying to enshroud all of us. When you can wind up being so completely distraught that you're literally willing to kill yourself because some out of control agency with a bunch of aggressive little dudes that don't know the law, but boy, they understand how to operate that weapon, and it's really easy to operate when you don't have one. If you think this is going to get better, you're wrong. It won't unless we stand up and go, no, you're out of business, and you're going to jail after we strip you of your assets. And let this be a lesson to the rest of you. Don't ever do this again to any citizen of this country. You are no more important than they. And in fact, based on your conduct, you're not as important. You're just a beast with a badge and a mandate. And to hell with all of that. Chris, thanks. I tend to get a little jacked up over these things, but look, Either say it now or forget about it, because in the not too distant future, if enough people don't speak up now, you're not going to get an opportunity to speak up. So.
Absolutely. In closing, I would just like to say two things. Call your federal delegation, tell them to support H.R. 622, the defunding of the Bureau of Land Management, military law enforcement, and also never, ever, ever give up your right for a warrantless search. Even though you have nothing to hide and you're innocent, never give up that right that our government gives you. Always make the law enforcement officer get a signed warrant by a judge and be very respectful to that officer, but always retain your right that they cannot search you without a search warrant signed by a judge, even if you have nothing to hide and you're 100% innocent. Never give up that right. I made that mistake. It cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you've heard my nightmare. So I just wanted to close with that. Never give up your rights, ever.
Yeah, that's a good one, Chris, because when people are innocent, they're more willing to be compliant. They want to be cooperative. But folks, always keep in mind, when you're confronted by the so-called law, the object is not to determine your innocence. It's to determine, or even if necessarily, fabrication must be employed to determine your guilt of something. They're not there to prove you innocent. They're there to make a case for your guilt, whether you're guilty or not. Don't forget it.
100% correct. Perfect and right on.
Chris, I admire you very much. I really do. And I'm going to take everything that you've said at face value. I appreciate and respect your strength and not succumbing to this enormous pressure. I have no idea how nobody knows. You think you know how you're going to respond under pressure, but you don't know until the moment is upon you. You just don't know. So if you don't mind, just based on what you have said and for your fighting spirit, may I just say these words that we do on occasion, and it means a lot to us. And maybe it'll mean something to you, but you may know the late Patrick McGowan warned us in his series, The Prisoner, of this invasion of privacy, removal of rights, mind control, continual surveillance, backed up with just neutralizing your mind, just neutralizing you as a person, taking away your name and assigning you a number, and that's just what you are. Well, in the manner of Patrick McGowan, may I just say, you have gloriously illustrated and vindicated the right of the individual to be an individual, and I hereby induct you into our Order of the Arknights. And this assembly rises to you, Sir Chris.
Thank you so much. That's an honor. Thank you so much. I'm here for the people.
I know you are, and the honor is ours. Talk to you Saturday night, all right?
Okay, thanks. Would you make sure you send me a detailed email?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Take care out there. God bless.
Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you. I thought we were gonna get into some anthropology here. If we did, it just wasn't the anthropology I thought we were getting into. We have a real chance now to change things. Let's go back to that article that I read at the beginning of the program. The left hates you. The left is behind this. The left is the criminal element in our society. It is. It doesn't matter how you dress it up. It doesn't matter the paint job on it. It doesn't matter the color of the person. Left is left. And it's the wrong direction. I repeat, we have a chance now. There's nothing more tragic than squandering a chance, an opportunity to save the Republic, to restore the rule of law, not the rule of men, the rule of law. That's why people make contracts. Make a contract. Why do we need it on paper? Because as time goes by, people forget. Well, I didn't say that. Well, yeah, you did. You signed the paper. Oh, yeah. We'll go back to the court cases. We've discussed this before. Judges know this. Lawyers know this. eyewitnesses are sometimes the least reliable witnesses because they rationalize what must have happened because they didn't debrief quickly enough. A little bit of time went by, just like I dropped my keys the other day. I'll tell you a quick story. I dropped my keys the other day. It was a series of 3 little curves. I was riding the motorcycle and I heard this tinkling sound, and I thought, that doesn't sound normal. And sure enough, when I got back to base, I looked in the coat pocket. There was a hole in it. All the way through, pocket and lining. I thought, no, I am a chieftain among key losers, right? So I went out there and I thought, all right, it was a 3-part curve, a left and a right and a left. They're real close together. And I went back and looked, because I was sure that I'd heard the tinkling sound when I exited the 3rd curve. Didn't find him. Went back to base again. Then something told me, get the car and go and drive. And I thought, well, it was hard enough spotting him. I couldn't spot him on the bike. What makes you think you're going to spot him in the car? And then I thought, wait a minute. Are you sure you heard the tinkling sound when you exited the 3rd curve? Or did you hear the tinkling sound upon entry into the 1st curve? I went with that one, pulled over, walked 20 feet, and there they were. I was an eyewitness to my own event. You getting my drift here? I know you are. This is an opportunity. Let us contact our elected representatives in Congress in support of H.R. 622 and defund the Bureau of Land Management, the perpetrators of the Bundy nonsense. Those people are still suffering, the women and the kids especially. They're the ones that are behind this ridiculous event in Burns, Oregon. They're the ones responsible for the death of Robert Lavoy Finicum. Well, let's get on it, shall we? Be seeing you.